Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. A follow up to a previous post, so let's do it. Serious. What's something that you've seen in the woods that you cannot explain? Please remember to like, share, say hi, and subscribe. I spent a lot of time at my mother's father's house in the woods of Michigan. My brother and I got lost a lot, but if we could find the train tracks, we could always get back. One time, when I was about 8 and my brother was like 11 or 12, he didn't want me bothering him and ran away, leaving me alone in the woods. I was crying and wandering around when I came to a house with 2 horses and a pasture. I went and knocked on the door for help. This lady, who looked like an effing older librarian, answered and looked really shocked. I whined about my brother leaving me, and she told me to stay at the door while she went back in for something and then came out to walk me home. I was telling her about the train tracks, and she said she knew where they were. We get to the tracks, and I'm cheering and pointing in the direction of my grandpa's house, and I turned back and she was just gone, not a trace of her. I went ahead and crossed the tracks and followed the path to the house. My brother was already back, and they were literally all outside about to go looking for me. Grandma made me dinner, and we all went in to eat. I told Grandma that I wanted to bake cookies for the lady that helped me. She thought that it was one of the neighbors until I said she had 2 pretty horses. Apparently, none of the neighbors had horses, and when I said her house was on the opposite side of the tracks, she said that was all thick woods, and there were only houses on this side of the tracks. I was adamant about where I saw the lady and her house, so the next day, Grandma packed a bunch of sandwiches up for a picnic in the woods and to see where I saw the lady and her house. It was a long walk, but we made it to the pasture, except there was no house and no horses. The only thing in the pasture was my hat that I lost while wandering around before finding the lady's house. We still had our picnic. Not sure if it was a ghost or fae. I once walked through the undergrowth, i.e. off the trail, with my then girlfriend when we came across this spot where a few empty plastic bags were lying on the ground. Strange, because the woods are otherwise super clean. A pair of gloves, and most confusingly, the official ID card, passport of a young woman. Many plastic bags with nothing really in them but random odd things tied to trees. Sure, it could have been a homeless person, but us kids at like 12 plus of us lived in those small woods behind the church every single day. We never saw anyone like that ever. Passing through, I guess, but why so many bags? Still wonder. In Nepal a few years back, there was a huge earthquake and thousands of people and their homes were destroyed. Even our home was in a serious condition and needed a renovation. For the time being, we and our neighbors planned on living in our local neighborhood school for a few days. They provided us with rooms and a nice breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Since many people were there, we had a tiny space to adjust. I was 8. I had to take a dump in the middle of the night. I woke my dad up. The restroom was outside. Me and my dad turned on the flashlight. Remember, this is a huge jungle behind the school toilet. At first, we saw around 5 to 7 cats sitting and meowing in a deep voice on the wall that divides the school and the huge jungle. I took my dump and came outside. Me and my dad were shocked. We saw a man wearing full white clothes coming towards us from the jungle. It was terrific. I screamed and woke like 20 people up. Even my dad was pretty shocked since he had never seen it before. We stayed for a few more days, and I never even looking at the side of the school where the toilet was. By the way, the cats were not there when we came out of the toilet. Even till today, whenever I walk past that school, basically every day, I recall the same thing, and I'm scared to walk alone at night in that street. Not really that interesting, I guess, but that is my experience. A small Native American girl, traditional braids and clothes and moccasins, without a mouth, nose, or eyebrows, just pitch black eyes, waving for me to come into the woods from behind a tree. The girl was trying to lead me away from the hill I was on. My Nana and Grandpa didn't see her. None of the other campers saw her. The only thing who saw her was the lady next to our tent's dog. It was barking and growling and trying to run at her. This was in Appalachia. I mean, if I saw something like that in the woods, I would be pretty freaked out too, so yeah, crazy. This is a story from my boyfriend. Him and his buddies were walking at night in winter in northern Illinois. They stopped to check their phones, and from the tree line they saw a pale, bony hand curl around a tree and then draw back behind the tree. leaving deep scratches on the tree. The three of them hauled ass back to the house and didn't do night walks anymore. Hiking in the woods of western Maine, I came upon an old abandoned homestead. The house had collapsed and the old tractor with tools in the toolbox. The tractor had settled into the earth up to the axles. The only structure still standing was a small stone, sturdy family crypt. The door was half open, so I looked inside. There were 2 coffins badly deteriorated. The lid was off. The only bones I saw were long bones with no skulls, as if animals had gotten to the remains. Overall, the place had a calm, restful feel to it. Really big holes. Several very large holes fairly close to each other that seemed to serve no purpose. 10 feet wide, deep enough that if you jumped in, you'd have to have help getting out. Was someone preparing to bury a bunch of people? Was someone punishing their kid by making them dig holes? Did they hear there was buried treasure out there? We've never figured it out. I spent a lot of my childhood in very rural New England, which meant a ton of my time was spent outdoors. One particular house we lived in was literally the center of nowhere. The trail I liked to hike by my house had a section that went through a swamp, and it had a raised wooden platform to help walk over the flooded swampy parts. One of these walkways was always partly overgrown, with water reeds which at the time were taller than me, and the path curved, so for a time you would just be standing on a thin board surrounded by a wall of reeds on either side with nothing else in sight. One day, I was walking the trail, and right before I got to the reed path, I heard voices talking ahead like someone was walking the path in my direction. Totally normal. It's a public trail even if it is rural, so I saw other people from time to time. However, the voices stopped in the reed path, and nobody came out even after I waited several minutes. I finally figured they must have stopped to take pictures or something, and I could just squeeze past them on the boardwalk ahead. I was tired of waiting. As soon as I stepped into the reeds, I heard whispering start up again and expected to pass someone, or at least hear them go back out the other way. Instead, as I got to the center, the most point of the reed path where nothing is visible, I heard a huge crashing sound, like people had gone running off right into the reeds and into the woods. I suppose it could have been teenagers smoking or drinking and scared of getting caught, but the thing that made it so unnerving was that even though I could hear the reeds moving and snapping as something ran through them, I never once heard any footsteps or anything in the water. Remember, this path is raised on platforms because there's a good foot or two of stagnant swamp water beneath it and all around for several hundred feet. The water never made a sound like it had been disturbed. Also, there's nothing in that direction for someone to go toward. The woods went on in that direction for upward of 25 miles, and the only path in or out was the one I was on. I ended up running all the way home and didn't go back on the trail for a long time because it freaked me out. Still don't really have a good explanation for what that might have been. Lived in the Alberta, Canada countryside for most of my life. I will never forget the creature I saw when I was 8 or 9. I was in my cousin's treehouse, alone, waiting for them to come back. I was looking out the window, no glass, it's just a cutout in the wall, and I noticed a big black mass about 30 feet in the forest. I first thought it was a bear, but then I noticed it had bright red eyes. It was like they almost glowed. It looked right at me and then stood up. It had a bear-like head, but its body wasn't bear-like, and it looked insanely tall. It made a deep guttural groaning sound as it slowly lumbered and shuffled toward me. I hid under the window and closed my eyes. I remember hearing it walk under the treehouse and then keep going. I never saw that creature again, but I never stayed in a forest alone since. I used to live in the Hogbacks by Morrison, Colorado. Was always up until like 5 a.m. One night I heard the weirdest moan in my life. Like ugh, but deep as the ocean. I'm an idiot, so I got my BB gun and went out back. I saw what looked like a dude shambling around, but with what looked like rotted clothing hanging off in strips. It shambled away, slowly heading toward my way out, their neighbor's 8-foot fence. I checked it through my scope, and it looked like matted-ass dreads hanging loose but completely covered. It, out of nowhere, took the F off for like 10 feet, and I thought it tripped, then shambled up to my neighbor's fence and was just scraping its hands there for like 20 minutes. It was a little taller than the fence. Then it just dropped its hands to the side and stood there for another 5 minutes and bolted up the hill towards C470. The next afternoon, I woke up and went to the neighbor's fence, and it was covered in gore, bunny entrails hanging off the top of the posts, blood everywhere, and a rabbit pelt in the dirt. It was bizarre. Never saw or heard anything else like it. I've seen and heard black bears around there, but nothing like what or whomever I saw that night. I have never watched shows about aliens or Bigfoot with any intensity, but one weekend the wife and I were stuck inside because of storms, so we watched this show with this dude who supposedly is a survivalist who wasn't a Bigfoot researcher but was intrigued because of his encounters he believed were Bigfoot. They were walking in the area that had these crazy trees all pulled down and twisted up that supposedly couldn't have been done naturally, and they were too big for a human to do this way. So anyways, all that for this. I live in the sticks, surrounded by state land that has big hills, swamps, ponds big enough to almost be lakes. Never heard anyone in town talk about Bigfoot or anything. I've heard weird screaming and whatnot that sounds like they were being played on the snow, but this time I saw firsthand what they portrayed on the show. So, we go moral mushroom hunting on this land that day after we watched the show, and about a mile in these hills, we come upon this huge wad of trees all twisted up together. They were woven together like a rope. They weren't little either, bigger than a person could pull down and twist up. They ranged from 6 to 8 inches at the base of the trunk. I take a few pics because it was cool, and we move on. About 45 minutes later, we come upon another one, and now my wife is getting a little nerved out because now the woods are dead silent. We have our son who's 7, so we decide, yeah, it's time to leave. I unsnap the strap of my 1911 just in case. As we start walking, a limb about 2 inches in diameter and 3 feet long comes whizzing past us. I look at her and I point in the direction we came from, and I said, get moving and take our son. I pull my 1911 and walk quickly backwards, covering their back. I have no idea who or what is effing with us, but we weren't sticking around. Last thing that happened was this loud knocking, like someone slamming wood on wood. We finished walking back to the house, not really saying anything to each other until we got home. I mean, perhaps it was just your subconscious seeing things that you watched on that program, or you possibly saw Bigfoot or Sasquatch or something. What do you guys think? TLDR, I found a dead girl and no one believed me. When I was 4, I would run around the woods with my friends in Michigan. One day I was playing by myself and ran up on covering with a bunch of junk, 3 walls only. I came up on the backside and crept up around the side. Laying there was uncovered were legs. Pale white, almost bleach legs with a little bit of dirt on them. Crept up further and saw no pee-pee. Oh god. Then I saw hands, arms, chest, and face. One eye was half open and she had blonde hair. Her foot was cold and I ran. Ran all the way back home and told my mom. She thought I was playing make-believe again, and I drug this woman out to the shack. She kept stopping and saying, I'm going the wrong way, and there's nothing here. So it took quite a while, but we found the shack, and I ran up to the girl and was gone. I could see the imprint in the dirt, but my mom couldn't. She rolled her eyes, and we went to get ice cream. She noticed something was off about me for a month, and so she said because I wasn't acting normal. I was spacing out and zoning out at random times and would draw the dead girl constantly, to the point she and my dad sat down with me and we tried to talk about pretend and real life. We never found out who owned the shack, or maybe she didn't believe me and never looked, but I always see her when I close my eyes, creeping up on her laying there naked with dirt in places a normal person would have wiped it off. I lived in a part of Texas with dense forest. My friend and I were in middle school and enjoyed exploring at night. We learned that the drainage pipe on the side of the road was big enough for us to crouch through, so we hopped in and started walking, leaving markers to guide our way back. After 30 minutes to an hour of walking, we popped out of a manhole that landed us in the middle of nowhere deep into the woods. We kept walking until we came across an abandoned 2-story cabin, no road leading up to it, no means of accessing the cabin by vehicle. What could be argued as the front lawn was littered with half-buried toys. All of them looked very old in design. Plenty of porcelain dolls were buried in the yard. The windows were too dirty to see inside, so we broke a window with a rock to get inside. What could have been furniture at one point in time had rotted away so that only iron frames remained. The floor of the cabin was completely covered in old empty oil cans, the kind you see in 50s cartoons. We couldn't go upstairs because the staircase had collapsed from rot, So we left and started making our way back to the manhole we came in from. As we were walking away, I took a look back at the cabin. In the window of one of the second-story rooms, I swear to God I saw a child staring back at me. He looked to be about 8 to 10 years old and had short, straight black hair. I'm convinced that I saw a ghost that day. Found a crucified grizzly bear about 200 kilometers, 120 miles roughly, into the Canadian forest, nowhere near towns or even roads, so I'm not entirely sure how they were able to lift such a big animal up a good 30 feet up the tree, considering the average weight of a male grizzly can get up to 600 kilograms, 1,320 pounds. And this was definitely not an average-sized grizzly. Although not the biggest I've seen, by far the most "we should get the F out of here" moment I've ever felt. I realize that sounds hard to believe, especially given that it's the internet and people love to make huge claims, and frankly, if I wasn't the one telling the story, I'd probably doubt it too. So feel free not to believe me. No hard feelings if so. Just the image of what you described in the woods to be found would be really, at the least, a little concerning, if not downright frightening. But if you want no one to doubt you, take pictures. Actually have two stories. Number one, there was this old campsite, 30, 40, maybe even 50 years old. The tent was constructed of rotting branches and old leaves. It was situated next to what me and my siblings called the ravine, but it was probably an old river. The strange thing was, there were circumstances that I can't remember that led to us digging through the firestones. We saw what looked like precious gems under the old ash. My siblings reburied the stuff and got us to leave. We went back to the campsite every so often, but it was never in the same place, and the stuff wasn't in the ash anymore. I never really figured out what happened. Number two, I was in the same woods with my best friend, and we were just chatting, climbing the fallen trees. She and I fell into the ravine from the other story. It's actually a family landmark, very noticeable, but when we got out, the woods looked different. After about half an hour, we started to notice someone else in the woods with us. He wore a brown coat and camo pants. We could never see his face, as we never got that close. He never made any noise other than the crunching on dead leaves. We eventually got out of the woods, and me and my best friend were still shaken. I mean, two teenage girls being followed in an unrecognized woods by an older man, I assume they were male, general figure and size. It's scary stuff.